today we'll give you a quick introduction. We should have time for everybody on the call to give a 20-second introduction. We'll go through the objectives of the training, give you a quick introduction to the main business environmental impacts, the key takeaways of the IPCC report, and then most importantly, the actions that we can all be taking. So that final bullet will be the one that takes up most of this session. We're going to record this session as not everybody who wanted to join has been able to join. So if anybody's got any concerns with that, if you just send Katie or Bella a message in the chat and we'll make sure that we address those concerns appropriately. A recording of this webinar will be sent around afterwards so that you can all look back on what we've covered today, as will the slide deck. So I'm Eleanor Akers. I'm the founder and director of Innovative Energy Consultants. We are very proudly the Northwest FSB Sustainability Award winner 2023, and our team is certified carbon literate. We are an energy and sustainability consultancy, so we help businesses do things like put together carbon footprints, carbon reduction plans, and implement sustainability strategies. We also work with startups in the circular economy space. So at the moment, we're working with a company that's bringing a medical device to market that's designed to be as recyclable as possible. I know there's a couple of people from that project on this call, so really nice to see you all. And we also work with startups in the distributed energy space. So that's things like smart EV charging, smart buildings control. So the objectives of today's training are to introduce key environmental business impacts, the key takeaways of the 2023 report, and to share the actions that we can take. So the diagram on the right is a bit of a summary of all of the things that came out of the IPCC report, things that we all need to be doing. We need to be retiring coal plants. We need to be decarbonizing aviation and shipping and cement and steel. And all of these things can feel a little bit beyond what most of us have the capacity to do in our day-to-day roles. Most of us do not work for governments. Most of us are not the decision makers in steel plants or cement plants. And so the purpose of this training is to look at the things that we can do. So retrofitting buildings, shifting to electric vehicles, eating plant-based, so that we can all be part of the solution and be giving that message to the people that are making these decisions on things like coal plants, that this is something that we're working towards, and hopefully encourage that action on a wider level, because climate change is a very complicated problem and it's not one any of us can solve alone, but it's important that we all do the bits that we can do. So starting with business environmental impacts, what are they? A couple of you have mentioned, so Alice and Tom both mentioned things like process heating, energy usage in processes. The ladies at BICMO mentioned things like commuting. There are lots and lots of different negative environmental impacts that businesses can have, whether that's air pollution from the combustion of fossil fuels, water pollution from wastewater going into our water systems, whether that's the secondary impacts of air pollution from the electricity that we all consume. So whether we're working at home in a co-working space or on a production plant, we're all using electricity to power our laptops, and where that comes from affects the impacts of our business. So what businesses can do to have positive impacts is they can do things like invest in clean energy, retrofit buildings, ensure that water that's used in production is cleaned properly before being put back into the water system. So there are plenty of positive things that we can be doing. And one good way of measuring this, the ladies from BICMO mentioned they've got a target to be net zero by 2030. That's a carbon footprint. And so it's only by calculating what our businesses are doing today that we can understand what are the opportunities to improve. A carbon footprint is a summation of the total amount of greenhouse gases generated by the business. So carbon's a bit of a misnomer. We use, but in order to make apples to apples comparisons between businesses, we use something called CO2 equivalent. So all the fridges and freezers, whether that's a domestic one, whether that's in a shop, whether that's in an industrial freezing plant, they give off chlorofluorohydrocarbons. And in order to compare the impact of those emissions with carbon, with methane, we put them into CO2 equivalent. So it's a really good proxy for the total impact of the business, even though it doesn't necessarily describe things like waste to landfill or water. It's a really good starting point. The sixth assessment report was published by the IPCC last month, and we've put together the key takeaways here. So unfortunately, there is high confidence, so that's 80% confidence that global warming will exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade this century, which means that some future changes are now unavoidable or irreversible. So that's things like forest fires, it's things like the ice caps melting, unusual weather patterns. Unfortunately, a lot of this is no longer reversible, but some of it is. The current pace and scale of climate action is insufficient, so we all need to work together to move away from the business as usual path in order to prevent exceeding our remaining carbon budget for 1.5 degrees C by 2030. Because even if we don't quite manage to prevent 1.5 degrees, 1.5 degrees is still a lot better than 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees. So there's still hope. As Princess Leia said, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope, but it's help me, business community. You are one of my many hopes in this case. So as we said before, there's a huge range of actions, some of which are out of the reach of the folks on this call. None of us, I think, have the ability to retire a coal plant, but we do all have the ability to reduce the amount of meat that we eat, reduce the amount of food waste. We all have the ability to procure clean energy, even if it's just for our own homes, if not for our business. So what do we mean by clean energy? Clean energy is carbon-free energy. It's generally understood to mean solar, wind. The EU taxonomy has been updated to include nuclear as clean energy, as has the UK and the USA. As a business or a homeowner, you can procure renewable energy. There are plenty of renewable energy tariffs available. It's really important, though, to do a bit of digging to see, is this renewable energy or is this just moving carbon certificates around? In the UK, we normally recommend people look at Ecotricity, Octopus, and Good Energy because their energy production, they either own or have PPAs with the producing sites. So that's the wind farms, the solar farms. So by buying from them, you are supporting bringing new clean energy onto the grid. As a business, you can do the same thing, but at a much larger scale. Businesses have the opportunity to invest in PPAs, which is a power purchase agreement. So as a business using a higher amount of energy than a domestic home, you can buy energy from a specific solar farm or wind farm and know that the money you're spending on electricity is going to producing clean, renewable energy. There are also opportunities to install behind the meter solar and wind. So at the domestic level, most of us, if we own the property, may be able to put in a solar panel, but a wind turbine is a little bit trickier unless you happen to own a lot of farmland. But businesses can look at putting behind the meter wind assets in place. There's also the opportunity to put in batteries. So by having battery storage, it allows us to extend the solar day. It allows the inconsistencies of renewable production. So the wind doesn't always blow at the same speed. The sun doesn't always shine at the same intensity to be smoothed out. We can also use smart control systems. So within the house, we can use things like thermostats and smart radiator valves to make sure that we're not heating rooms that nobody's in. We can also do this with businesses. So particularly with COVID and hybrid working, it's really important to understand the office usage patterns to make sure that offices aren't being heated whilst nobody's in them. If we've got large processes, we can use control schemes to ensure that we're not overheating or overcooling. We can look at things like process integration to reduce the amount of energy that's being used for heating and cooling. We can also, in offices and plants of all shapes and sizes, install things like lighting on a movement sensor to make sure that the lights don't stay on when nobody's there. So I work in a co-working space. I do a lot of work with the US. I'm often the last person there. And so the lights automatically switch off and only switch on again when people move at about 7 in the evening. So I'm often on a call. Suddenly all the lights will go off and I'll be like, to get the sensor to go on again. But it's a great thing because it means that the co-working space isn't being lit when nobody's there. And if we want to get really, really clever, we can match usage and generation. So that's things like making sure that if we've got solar panels on our roofs, we could do it really simply just through planning, making sure that we put things like the dishwasher and the washing machine on when the sun is shining, when there's peak production. There are now apps available. So I believe if you buy your energy from Octopus Energy, as a homeowner, you can download this app that will do it automatically. There are apps out there like EV Energy that allow EV charging to happen at times when the grid is greenest. And then for businesses, same kind of thing exists, but a larger scale. There's plenty of HVAC tuning technologies out there. So that means particularly in warmer places, maybe than the UK, where there's a lot of air conditioning used in offices, you can do that pre-cooling, preheating in the most efficient way possible. There's also things like timing production processes to happen when the grid is greenest. A little bit more complicated, a little bit higher scale, but again, because of the scale, the impact is larger. So it's definitely worth taking that time to really think about when we're using energy and can we match it to the generation patterns from renewables. In countries that have high nuclear penetration, so in the UK, there's something called the Eco 7 tariff, which is a different tariff at night to encourage people to do things like run the dishwasher overnight, run the washing machine overnight, so that you're using that baseload nuclear energy. Similar situation in France. Don't think it's the same situation in the Netherlands, but these tariffs are going to become a lot more granular. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye out on them, because in addition to that reduction in carbon, using energy at the times when renewable or nuclear generation is on is going to be cheaper. And these smarter, more granular tariffs will reward you for that financially by reducing your energy costs. So lots and lots of good reasons to invest in clean energy, both from an investment side of actually building things and a procurement side, and lots of different scales of action. So things that we can all do individually as domestic homeowners, as people working in co-working spaces, right the way up to people managing production plants. Decarbonisation of supply chain. So I'm not going to go into the different scopes of carbon emission today, but there is a slide in the appendix with a link to a blog we wrote on it that will give you a bit more context in this. But scope 3 emissions shortly are the indirect things, the things you can't control. So all the emissions associated with creating this water bottle and shipping it to me, they're my scope 3 emissions, because I didn't actually make that water bottle. I had no say on where the steel came from, how it was put together. But because I bought that water bottle, that created a business need for that water bottle to be creating these emissions. So decarbonisation of supply chain for most businesses is actually the bulk of the environmental impact, and it is quite tricky to reduce because, like I say, you don't have direct control. I can't ring up Chili's water bottles and say, hey, I would really like it if you reduced your emissions. But there are things we can do. And the first thing we can do is ask. Chili's water bottle, I've only bought one of them. They might not listen to me. But if you are spending a significant amount of money with a supplier, they are motivated to listen to your concerns. So one thing we can do is we can ask, what is the carbon intensity metric? So carbon intensity is the amount of CO2 produced per kilogram of product or per dollar or sterling or euro of revenue. And it's a way of measuring the carbon footprint of a business. And if you don't ask businesses for this, they might not think to calculate it. But if all of their customers are saying, what is your carbon intensity? What are you doing? Do you have a sustainability policy? It creates a business case within that business for these changes to be made. Second thing we can do is lead by example. So if I turn around and I say, hey, Chili's water bottle, what's your carbon intensity? And if I don't know, and they'll ask, why do you want that? And if I'm able to say, well, the reason I want this is I'm trying to decarbonize my business, and we've done our carbon footprint. I've used a proxy number for the scope 3 emissions from you, but it would be fantastic to have the real number. And this is how your impact is impacting my business on our journey to net zero. I'm demonstrating that it can be done. It's also great if I'm able to demonstrate by really understanding my carbon footprint, I was able to reduce my costs. And even better if I'm able to say, by really understanding my carbon footprint and communicating my sustainability journey, I was able to gain more customers. I was able to bring more people on that journey with me. And most importantly, I was able to do my bit in reducing human-led climate change. And then finally, you can explore alternatives. So if there are two different suppliers of a material and one of them is on that sustainability journey and one of them isn't, potentially just switch your spend away to that company that is making those changes, that is working to decarbonize and is willing to take the next steps on the sustainability journey with your business. Next thing is retrofitting. So buildings are responsible for 59% of UK electricity consumption, which, given that a lot of our homes are heated with gas, is pretty significant. The Netherlands and Poland, it's a lot lower. So put those figures in just to give a bit of context to really demonstrate the potential impact of making small changes in the UK, as most of our audience are UK based. So that could be things like putting solar panels on the roof. It could be things like improving the insulation in your loft. It could be something as simple as fitting a draft excluder to a door that's not properly fitted to reduce the amount of cold air that's getting in. Things like shutting the curtains at night just to keep that heat in. All seems really small, all adds up. And then we can do similar things on the scale of an office or a production site. So if our businesses own or operate in buildings, we can be doing things like making sure that a really common one that we see all the time is people heat the buildings over the weekend, where there's no need for that because they haven't put that control system in place. Other really common thing we see a lot of is people don't go up into the lofts very often. So a lot of the time that insulation is worn really thin and it's not really doing its job. And it's a simple thing just to put in another layer and it saves loads of money, reduces energy needed to heat the building, makes it more comfortable, and most importantly, cuts carbon emissions. In the process world, things like making sure that pipes have been fitted with appropriate insulation and lagging. I've personally worked on a lot of older sites where these things fall off after a while or they get taken off to do a job and don't get put back on, and just really having that site discipline to keep everything properly insulated and put together goes a really, really long way to reducing energy usage and thus cutting carbon emissions. And then finally, restore degraded lands. So that can seem a little bit challenging if you're not in that business. So I know Alistair's got farm on the call, so one thing that he could be doing is looking at ensuring that the land that's not being used for farming is being maintained well, employing regenerative farming practices. Something that we can all do as consumers is we can do supply chain due diligence. So if you're a larger company, that's a lot of potential to influence and invest, particularly on things like palm oil. But even as individual consumers, we can do that due diligence to look at the food we're eating, look at where it's coming from. Is it contributing to deforestation? So palm oil is a big, big one. So if we can just cut a bit of palm oil out of our diets, that actually goes quite a long way to reducing deforestation. We can also donate our time and our money to conservation charities. So in Manchester, there's a wonderful charity called City of Trees that goes around planting trees in Manchester. So getting involved with things like that. And then we can also support our local farmers by buying local. This not only reduces emissions due to transportation, but particularly European farming practices are highly regulated. Very well understood. There's a lot of legal mechanisms in place to make sure that deforestation and damage to the land is limited. You might notice the 1% for the Planet logo on this page. The reason we've put that there is we are a 1% for the Planet member, and the reason that we chose to do this is we didn't feel we had the expertise or the time to do all of the due diligence that's needed to make sure that money being invested in conservation charities is going to the right places and being spent properly. 1% for the Planet, they do all that work for you. When you sign up for 1% for the Planet, you donate 1% of your revenue to these approved charities. And as I say, they've done all the due diligence to make sure it's actually being used as you think it's going to be used. So highly recommend if you're looking to make an impact with your business, but not really sure where to start. Even if you don't sign up, all of the vetted charities are on their website, making it really easy to be sure that your money is doing what you would like it to be doing. We can increase active transport. So for all the cyclists on the call, all the cycle insurance people, this is a huge thing we can all be doing. And in addition to reducing emissions from transportation, so that's petrol, diesel, even EVs, there's emissions associated with putting together the lithium-ion batteries that go into the cars. Look at that picture of a bicycle. That bicycle has far, far less embodied carbon than any car out there. And in addition to all these great benefits to the environment, cycling and walking have great benefits to us. It's been shown to improve health and well-being, getting outside, getting fresh air, daylight, really, really good for people. So this is also something we can make that choice to do individually, but how can we influence others within our businesses to make these choices? How can businesses promote active transport? Well, we can make it easier for people to commute. One thing we can do there is provide routes. So say your office is located in a business park and there's only one safe cycle route to get there. Tell people, tell everybody working in the office, if you want to cycle to work, this is the recommended route. This is the safest route, or, this crossing's a bit dodgy. My top tips for getting around it are this, that, and the other. Give people the confidence that there's a way to do it safely. And facilities are important. So I actually chose my co-working space on the basis that it had a shower, because I didn't feel like my colleagues needed to sit next to me after I'd cycled into work without taking a shower. Hairdryers, hugely underrated in these things. So making sure that we set up our working spaces in a way that makes it easy for people to commute by either walking or cycling. Really powerful tools. And then finally, making sure that our HR policies line up with active travel. So things like in the winter when it gets darker, maybe people aren't confident cycling in the dark. So having that conversation saying, if you turn up 10 minutes late, 15 minutes late because you wanted to cycle in the light, that's fine. We're going to be flexible. Putting reward systems in place. So things like spot bonuses, things like putting policies in place that encourage these things. So not just active travel, but things like carpooling, taking public transport, all of these things. So if we know that the bus that gets people to the office is a bit unreliable or infrequent, struggles to get people in for 9 o'clock, making it clear that it's okay to get in at 9:10 because the bus was late. That's fine. Something I've seen that's really good in some companies is if everybody is organized enough to carpool to come to a meeting together, there's a spot bonus system in place for that. So lots of things we can be doing to increase active transport, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of the people within our businesses. And when active transport isn't possible, public transport. Finally, eating green. So making changes to our own diets and promoting plant-based menus at the office are a great way to reduce emissions. Emissions relating to the production of meat have been shown time and time again to be a lot higher than to the emissions associated with a plant-based diet. I'm not saying everybody should go vegan, but what I am saying is that if your company is holding an event, you don't know how many people are going to turn up, you don't know how hungry everybody's going to be, why not make it a vegetarian or vegan buffet? Because the emissions associated with producing the food are going to be lower. If not all the food is eaten and goes to landfill, the emissions associated with the waste are going to be lower. And then we can also consume more seasonal, regional, and local produce, because it's not just the emissions associated with growing the food, it's also the emissions associated with transporting it to where we are. So today's food chain is the reason that we're able to sustain almost 8 billion people as a society is plant fertilizer that has been created using hydrocarbons. And there's huge amounts of food waste. And the more we can do to reduce that, the less hydrocarbon produced fertilizer will be needed, the fewer emissions. And all these small changes, they add up to societal changes that make the difference. So it may seem to you that choosing to cater your event with hummus and salad rather than bacon sandwiches doesn't make a big difference, but it does, because it all adds up. It all shifts to making those societal changes. So as the IPCC report said, our choices will reverberate for hundreds, even thousands of years. Another little Star Wars meme there. No, try not. Do or do not. There is no try. We just need to be making these changes. We need to be working together. We need to be collaborating. We need to make sure that we are sharing information, that best things that have worked well for our companies, we're not just keeping to ourselves. Something that I think really showed me the power of collaboration was I was talking to a guy that worked at Reckitt Benckiser. So that's the company that makes Lyocell and all the bleach sprays. And he was saying that, you know, Procter & Gamble is their biggest rival. They would never do anything with P&G. They just always trying to outcompete each other. Except in Singapore, both companies and some additional companies working in the region all pooled money, resources, and time to put in place a solar farm to ensure that they would all be powered using green energy, because they recognized that the fight against climate change is one that could not be won by Reckitt Benckiser alone, and that it's only through collaboration that they were able to make the changes at the scale that need to be made. And so that took a lot of trust, which is a challenge when we're trying to, you know, all businesses run to make money. Can't lose sight of that. And we do have to trust the people that we're collaborating with to make these changes. But what that sort of anecdote showed me is that leap of faith by all those companies to work together really paid off. The IPCC recommend that we share the benefits and the burdens. So what that means is that we might be sitting here in Europe eating a sandwich that contains palm oil that was grown in Indonesia. And so maybe we have the benefit of the sandwich because of the palm oil, but the burden is actually on the people in Indonesia because of the deforestation. And we need to recognize that. And we need to ensure that those of us who are in a position to do more do more. Not everybody owns a home and is in a position to put solar panels on it. But if you are fortunate enough to be in that position, investing in those technologies that are going to green the grid is one way that you can share the benefits of having that house and reduce the burdens of air pollution to everybody. And it's just really important as well that we recognize the good work that people are doing, because sometimes it does feel a bit overwhelming that there's a lot to be done that isn't going to get done. But by recognizing those times where actions have been taken that have made change, it not only provides that education piece, but also provides that bit of hope to the rest of us that change can be made. So if you have any questions or there's a particular project that you would like a bit of help with, you can book in a free 30-minute consultation with us, and we can discuss ways that we can help your business grow sustainably. That's it from me. We've got 5 minutes left at the end of this call, so if anybody's got any questions or there are any discussion points, now is the time.
Can I just make a comment rather than a question? It's something we've particularly come up against. I mentioned the whole seasonality issue. There's another thing which creeps into seasonality, which is the longevity of a contract, and Tom will understand this. Again, if you want to make a capital investment on, say, a heat exchanger or a heat recovery unit or something, yes, it's nice if you can use it all year round. One of the things we're looking at is can we convert our season, our 6-week season, into all year round by freezing it all? Let's freeze it all, and then we'll process it during the year. Easy, because there's a cost of freezing. But then another issue is, how many years have we got this project for? Is it 1, 2, 10? How many years? And again, you can't, without knowing how many years you've got left on a contract, so even the way the contracts are written, whether it be a 5-year evergreen or a 3-year evergreen or a 10-year but not evergreen, but not automatically renewable, it means that you get to year 8 of a 10-year contract, you've only got 2 years left. And suppliers of waste or suppliers of any kind of equipment, actually, the longevity of a contract makes such a lot of difference. It's almost as important knowing whether you've got 5 years on a contract or 2 or 1. So there's a lot of other issues here which can be, they cost nothing to change. There's zero cost to change a contract from 4 years to 3 years or 3 to 5. But the longevity of the contract and can't change the longevity of the season. It's amazing how much difference that makes. Just a comment.
That's a really important point. And one thing that I'm going to link that back to is that communication piece. So if you're entering into a contract with a buyer or a supplier, and you know that if you had that certainty, you would be able to make an investment that would reduce the carbon footprint of the product, say that, do the calculations, say, if I knew I had 10 years to pay back this project, I would invest in the heat exchanger or whatever it is, and this would reduce my carbon footprint by X amount of tons each year. Is this something that you're in a position to support? And maybe the answer is no, but at least you've started that conversation, that question, and they may, have to loop in other stakeholders. But if you can work towards being transparent in your need for a longer contract, other than I would like business certainty and I would like the money, adding that extra lever, that can be really helpful. Any other questions, comments? Right, well, if not, I'll say thank you all so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking time out of your days, and I will give you 3 minutes of your lives back. And thank you very much, and I hope to speak to you all again in the near future.